What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Meadows and Makers podcast here on MSP Waves. I hope everybody out there is doing well. My name is Greg Dowd. I am the host of the Meadows and Makers podcast. I am also known as Making Stuff in the Hive community. Welcome everybody to a new episode. Last week I skipped out. Was just kind of having a crappy night, so sorry about that, guys. Back this week, but yeah, we come to you on under the blood moon tonight. We got some midterm elections going on in the United States. General chaos and mayhem and disorder and all that stuff. We'll see what comes out of these elections, but I could probably guarantee you that not much is going to change. It doesn't matter, is it red or blue. It's kind of the elites against everyone else. So, the more we stay divided between two sides, we're going to get gamed by these people at the top. So that's the one thing that I want to share with you guys tonight is this One Nation Under Blackmail with Whitney Webbs. She's done a lot of research into the background of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and like their ties into basically just international organized crime is how you could call it, of what all happens between not only financial crimes but also like sexual blackmail crimes and stuff like that. So I wanted to share a podcast that I ran across that I felt did a really good job of interviewing Whitney and kind of getting out a lot of the great points that she's trying to get across in her work. Um, so yeah, I wanted to share that with you guys tonight. I have been working on some projects in the background. I have been working on a Glock build, 3D printed one, and so I've been waiting for some other stuff to get to me. But been working on that and learning a lot of new tricks and things on my 3D printer, as well as looking into printing with more exotic materials like this stuff called glass-filled Zytel, and found out some interesting information on some of that. The that material would be like similar to what they use as the plastics material for a actual like Glock lower. Um, so yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff that I've been looking into as well. Lots of cool stuff to play with on the 3D printing end of things. I still haven't fired up the laser or the CNC carver on the machine yet, but I plan to be playing around with those as things kind of get colder around here and all that kind of stuff. Um, I got in some new tools for the garden and have not totally got those all to put to use yet, but I have them here. Um, some of these the broad fork is, I think, something that's going to help out a lot because it's something that we haven't really done. So I think in the gardens where the soil may have some good stuff in it, we've composted there for several years and done a lot of that and brought in some manure and wood chips and things like that to bring into the soil. Um, but we haven't really turned the soil very much or uh, tilled the soil very much at all. And I was starting to learn about the no-till gardening method for a while there, and still am still watching a lot of stuff on it. So anyway, these guys use these broad forks and stuff to bust the soil loose without disturbing the microorganisms in the soil, and the microorganisms are the things that do the most for you. Uh, so yeah, that's something that I have received recently. Some different garden tools, including the broad fork, and I haven't got out there to start busting up the soil, but that's on my list for getting a cover crop into the garden and being able to start up a new crop for the for after winter. So an overwinter crop, and probably break loose some soil for the additional area for a garden. And then on our PMA land, I need to go out and do some landscaping and stuff and some work out there. And once I get some of that landscaping done, I need to be working on getting some structures up out there. So that's all kind of some stuff that is coming down the pipeline. So need to focus some time on doing all that kind of stuff. Let's see. You don't hear anything. Well, shit. Well, damn. Streaming over here. Let's see. Where am I live streaming? This is it right here. Yes. Copy the link. Let's see, streaming over here as well. So you can hear me. Not sure what else to do right now. All right. So, we got some difficulties on the stream. You'll get it shut down. Oh shit. Yeah. Yeah. That's all I have the capacity to pull off. We'll do it live, man. We'll do it live. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, that's where I'm at on the YouTube right now. So you can share that link for anyone that wants to listen to the podcast, and hang out in the Discord, because I can still see everything that's going on in Discord. So that's about all I can do to maybe figure out this issue right now. So sweet. So what I wanted to share tonight is some of the, so I was talking about some of the projects I've been working on, learning more about the 3D printer. I've been doing some more printing on the machine and dialing in settings and stuff like that. And the PLA plus material, learning how to dial in, quality prints with this thing. I printed off a couple of calibration cubes and looked at their quality, and um, based on some settings that I found online from some other guys that were printing and giving out, some of their printer settings. So a lot of the folks I'm following are using different printers than mine, and so yeah, I've been looking through some forums on people that have my specific printer, on some things that I can play with in settings and stuff. So I think like doing some comparison prints. I printed one using their provided software that does the generates the G code for the printer. They call it Lubon, and so so far the uh, it seems like the other software, Kira, as opposed to Lubon, has more refinements that you can use in the software. So it actually does a little bit better job, at least giving you more options on how to set, different parameters for your printing. So, so yeah, it looks like probably Cura is a better software. But I still need to play with my machine and do some more printing and print some more stuff, and then yeah, come up with some custom products to make. I was watching one guy's video on some of the products that he's making in his wood shop, and he's like just finding scrap materials and building like frames over some tin things that he found and salvaged, and just trying to find stuff that's in decent shape that you can transform into a piece of art of some kind. And one of them was like some tongue and groove flooring that they put into the shape of like a cross and just kind of glued it together. And so they were saying just like your the money you make is based on the smaller things that you sell. So like you can sell like a bunch of smaller things while you're building up for like a big project you're working on. So like kind of fills in your day or like your schedules. Like you need to make or you make more on some of the smaller things. Like you make, like he was talking about, coat hangers and those coasters and like those little wall art pieces and just functional items that you can use. So I thought it was a good video on talking about how you can be creative, and on how you're building something with the woodworking business. So anyway, yeah, I kind of wanted to throw everyone into the world of Whitney Webb tonight, and the latest interview that has come out, or one of the latest interviews that's come out with Whitney Webb, is on this PBD podcast. And I wanted to share this with you guys tonight because I really think this kind of paints the picture well on kind of how things run in this world right now. And it's a really fascinating interview. I think everybody should check it out. So I'm gonna play this for you guys tonight, and then I'll be watching the chat. We're under the blood moon, midterm elections of 2022, November 8th, 2022. Seeing what's happening in the world and some of the history of where we're at in the world right now. So, wanted to play this for you guys in a little while, and then there's some other stories that I wanted to talk about as we kind of wrap up at the end of the podcast tonight. And while we're at it, I guess one of the stories that I did want to share with you guys is this one from library. And this was tweeted today, or yesterday. I think I caught this story from library. Started. We lost. Sorry, everyone. November 7th. So that was yesterday. I tweeted out that they lost their court battle here. And the SEC has created a ruling. So let me share this with everybody here. There we go. Thank you about the mountain beard. Shalom, Normak. Appreciate it. So yeah, this came out this week from library, talking about how the SEC is ruling in this case. Basically, the implication of that would be that all cryptocurrencies are going to now fall or have the potential to fall under the aspects of a security. And so as an investment security. And so, a lot of folks in this community, that affects a lot of us, being involved in cryptocurrency. And so it's not a great thing to come out. Not great news, but I would say don't. I mean, we didn't not see that coming. I mean, a lot of folks, if you're in the space, in the cryptocurrency realm, it was just everybody's been talking. It's going to be a matter of time until they're going to start trying to regulate tighter on cryptocurrencies. And library, they targeted them. And so, my reply to those guys is that I typed this out. That the SEC can lick dog shit. There's no regulating open source. You can't regulate open source code and decentralized networks, and all they can do is target organizations that have some type of central location. If developers are anonymous and decentralized, then the government can say whatever. They can't stop the signal. So, that was one perspective. That's my perspective on that whole issue. Is that okay, they want to regulate you now. Now you I mean, I believe from past interviews with Jeremy, he's talked about, how their developer team is more decentralized, so they're not all in one location. And I believe he's talked about that. And, really that's all I would need is just, somebody to, possibly, just be creating what they would call a decentralized autonomous organization where, if one person gets targeted, then, the other person can just continue the organization, keep it going. So interesting times in the world of cryptocurrency and all that stuff. So, it is a viable topic for everything that I have promoted is, to start using alternatives to the dollar and start to figure out how you can spend your cryptocurrency to make it be useful for you in barters and deals and things like that. And to, kind of every little extra bit that you have after you paid all your bills and everything like that, and maybe make an investment or two in crypto and see where it goes. So, um, you know, so using cryptocurrency has helped me in certain situations. And, I don't know if I would have been able to do certain things that I've done without having the ability that I knew how to use crypto. So, I guess that's one thing I can say about it is some of that experience. So, anyway, you can't stop the idea, man. There's, decentralized network is a way to exchange value using, this protocol and open source code. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, you have to shut down the internet or stop people from sharing information. Lots of blocks on the internet, which is a possibility. Uh, but yeah, if it starts getting to that point, we all are gonna have to think about what we do at that point, because you know where's your line? At what point? What do you have to give up to be plugged into that system? What do you constantly have to be on a device that is associated with your identity of some sort, and have it be monitoring. Um, so, or do you want the choice? Or do you want the choice to stay more private and not do that and still use the internet? Um, it's not there yet, but I think that's part of where we're headed. So something I've been thinking about recently. So yeah, guys, I wanted to share this podcast with you guys with Whitney Webb, and then if we can, maybe get into one of these other issues that seems to be so prevalent now. One more thing, I think I talked to you guys maybe the last time I was on the podcast about Larken Rose was trying to raise some money, and it looks like I don't know if he got all the money he needed, but anyway, it looks like a lot of people sent him some donations. So I just wanted to say thank you to anybody out there that may have been listening. If you sent something over to Larkin, and he made a thank you video for that for people donating. So yeah, I went over and yeah, just sent a little something to them for all they do. I don't have a whole lot, but I really like what Larkin is telling everybody, and really support his work. And it's all going towards helping with the final touches on the Jones Plantation movie that they're working on, and they've done on a pretty shoestring budget for a movie. Like kind of pretty high production value movie is what they've been working on with the Jones Plantation thing here. So yeah, here's a little thank you video from Larkin and Amanda Rose.
But it also has a special deal, so stay tuned for that. Howdy, folks. Wanted to make a quick video thanking all of you so much for the donations we got after my pathetic plea for help. And I love the fact that a whole bunch of it was little donations, and some was huge chunks, and of course we're super thankful for them too. But I like it when lots of people sacrifice a tiny bit and it helps out a ton. So that's really cool, and now I can like breathe for a month. And by breathe, I mean work constantly, but not have to worry about
not
paying
panic
rent.
about the bills that are huge that are looming over our head. Yeah, that was hugely unexpected, just because we don't always know what is going to catch with the algorithms, like if it's going to even be seen by the audience. And then we do have an email list, so we actually put it out to that list, so that helped hugely. So thanks to those guys on the list, because you guys actually saw and gave.
And other people spread it too.
Yes, and other people spread it, so thanks to those who spread it. Also, a couple people were like, I hope that thousands see this, and I hope they donate. Well, not thousands, but more than usual, and a very high number of people this time, and it was like, wow, cool. So we were just like really humbled, but also really relieved, and it enabled us to quickly start like taking care of stuff that we needed to take care of. So,
and this isn't just a thank you, it's also to offer people a deal, because somebody donated in a interesting, creative way and said that for the first 5 people who decide to get Candles in the Dark, which is attendcandles.com, the price went up to $125 recently, which is, you have it forever. You can go back and review it and go whenever you want.
Yeah, it's a professionally filmed full 2-day seminar that's now online and accessible forever. So $125 is a good deal.
So this person said he will donate for the first 5 people who get it, the first $50 worth. So basically he's bringing the price back down to $75 for the first 5 people who do it. So he's doing sort of the matching thing, which I think is awesome. Many thanks to him. I don't know that we should mention him by name, so we're not gonna, but you know who you are. And he doesn't do it for attention. He does it because he's an awesome human being. You know who you are. Anyway, if you want that deal, email me at larken@larkenrose.com. Again, it's only for the first 5 people who do it, but so don't suddenly throw money and expect to get the deal, but email me first, and the first 5 people who say they want it will get that deal. Yeehaw.
So yeah, again, if you didn't get that, larken@larkenrose.com. Email him to see if the deal is available, if you can get in as one of the first 5, and it'll be only for 7.
All right. So yeah, that was a little thank you from Larken about that, and some good news happening there. Some people giving some funds to Larken, who could definitely, he deserves a ton for all the work he's done in the Liberty movement, and a lot of stuff that he does to get the message out there. And the dude just keeps going at it, man. He doesn't stop. So I really respect the guy. All right. So this is the interview with Whitney Webbs, and titled "The Truth About Jeffrey Epstein" with Whitney Webbs on the PBD Podcast, episode 198. And I believe this guy's name is Patrick, and he gets into Whitney Webbs' new book, Nation Under Blackmail, which is on my reading list, and the books I just got the week before. So it's one I've been waiting to dive into, and especially after listening to this podcast. So I'm going to play it for you guys, and some really great stuff in here. So here we go.
Employees around you and you got like a deadline today, maybe don't listen to this at a 2.0 speed. Listen to this at 1.25. Slow down a little bit, because we're going to talk about a lot of different things. So just an opening thing. There's a lot of things a person can do investigative journalism on. You can do stuff on JFK assassination. You can do stuff on many different things. What got you turned on about wanting to learn about what's going on with Epstein?
Well, it was actually when Alex Acosta, who was Secretary of Labor under Trump, he was quoted by Vicky Ward and some other people as saying that the reason he backed off on Epstein was because he was told that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence. So I originally wasn't planning to write about the case because I tend to focus more on underreported stories, and there was a lot of buzz around Epstein after his arrest at that time. But once the intelligence angle came up, it was kind of like, well, I'd like to see, where that leads, because even when that acknowledgement came out, there wasn't a lot of interest, at least it seemed to me anyway, in mainstream media, in getting really to the bottom of what that means, that he belonged to intelligence.
Yeah, what does that mean? Belongs to intelligence.
It could mean a lot of things, right? It could he could either have been an intelligence asset, he could have been, an agent, and also, which intelligence agency are we talking about, right? So it was kind of an open question, but, once you get that type of acknowledgement about someone as controversial as Epstein, a lot of things start to move to sort of protect the people who would have been his handlers in that situation.
When did you first hear his name, and when did the general population out there start hearing his name? Because I don't think I heard his name until 2018, 19. My numbers right? When did you hear about
2019 was the arrest, and I'd heard of him, before, because he was arrested, previously in around 2006, 2007. So his name was around because, even then people knew of the association with people like Bill Clinton and Trump and a lot of, very powerful and influential people.
Mm-hmm. He's been talked about for a while. It's not a new thing.
But as far as was a lot more extensive.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
For sure.
The average person hearing Epstein's name is in the last handful of years,
couple of years.
So
absolutely,
that's a good question right there. So maybe from this perspective, what does the average person, in your eyes, since you've been doing a lot of due diligence and research on this, what does the average person think they know about Epstein? And maybe we can get into what are some things we don't know that we should definitely know.
All right. So as far as I see it, the narrative about Jeffrey Epstein that I think most people have absorbed because it's been the mainstream media coverage, they focus pretty specifically on what he was doing from 2000 to about 2006 or so, and only on the sex crimes. And beyond that, maybe a handful of outlets have talked about things maybe in the 90s, maybe things after his first arrest, what he did between that time and his second arrest. But really beyond that, it's a very narrow focus, in my opinion, because this is a guy that really entered, the workforce, I guess you could say, sometime in the 70s. And he was, visiting the Clinton White House in the 90s. And there's been very little interest, especially in American mainstream media, in talking about that particular period of time in Jeffrey Epstein's career. Actually, like UK media outlets like the Daily Mail and outlets like that have been much more focused on those aspects of the Epstein case than American mainstream media. And that's pretty telling because, Bill Clinton's an former American president, not a former British prime minister. So, why the lack of focus? The Daily Beast has also talked a little bit about that, but as far as I know, that's, pretty much it.
So let's get into it. So for again, like you said, a lot of people, they know about, what happened, some of the sex scandals in the earlier years. Great. We know about that. We've seen that. But going all the way back to how he got started in the 70s, the influence he had, there's got to be people that either trained him to do what he did in the 90s, 2000, or influenced him negatively and taught him some bad habits. A lot of times in business, we'll bring an agent that comes from another company. That company, if they do forgeries, because that guy learned some of those habits at a different company before they brought it here. Sure. Like, how did you learn how to do this? Well, when I used to do mortgage, it was called creative financing. Oh, my God, we don't do that. That's not the right way of doing business. So how do you yourself, when you look at somebody like this, someone must have taught him these bad habits?
Right. So it looks to me that it was somewhere around the time he went to Bear Stearns, which was his first really entry into the financial world. Because, as I just mentioned earlier, most people think of Epstein as a sex criminal. Based on my research, he's just as much a financial criminal as a sex criminal. But in the book, I try and go even further back to that in pursuit of, where this intelligence tie may have originally started. And, he apparently had a British royal family connection as early as the early 70s, like 1971, when he was, in his 20s. He was supposed to be backpacking in Europe. There's some weird mystique around that particular trip that I note in the book. But after that, he, went to the Dalton School, which I think some people that looked into the case, after his second arrest are probably familiar with, because the man that hired him there, who is the headmaster of Dalton at the time, was William Barr's father, Donald Barr. And
Bill Barr, as in the former...
the two-time Attorney General. Yes, correct. And his father was a former... a veteran of the Office of Strategic Services, which is a precursor to the CIA. And then he went to Columbia and was sort of a talent scout, I guess, in a sense, because he ran a lot of programs at Columbia focusing on talented high schoolers. And it's very possible that Epstein was a very gifted high schooler in the New York area. He graduated high school very young. He went to the Interlochen Academy of Arts and was a very talented teenager. So it's very possible he may have met Donald Barr that way. But Donald Barr, for whatever reason, hires him to go to the Dalton School. And according to former students quoted by the New York Times, he showed a weird interest in partying with underage kids even then, and wanted to drink, and some claim they hit on him and all this stuff. And other people said that was normal at the Dalton School and all of that. And the reason for him leaving isn't quite clear, but he was sort of headhunted there by Alan Greenberg of Bear Stearns, and went and joined that particular bank. And Alan Greenberg, just a couple of years after he brought Epstein into Bear Stearns, became the head of Bear Stearns. So Epstein was sort of, from what I understand, seen his mentor was basically Greenberg, and Greenberg goes to the top of the bank, and so obviously that helps Epstein's career. He, climbs the ladder pretty rapidly there, and then starts working with some of their elite clientele, the identities of which we don't exactly know, but based on the circumstances under which he left, it was related to an SEC investigation focusing on insider trading of the Bronfman family company, Seagram's, I believe. Seagram's. Yeah, so it seems like Edgar Bronfman, he may have been involved in advising him on some things, and what he was apparently well known for and talented in at Bear Stearns was advising people about tax law. So there may have been some sort of tax evasion stuff or something. I mean, he left under rather murky circumstances, and there's a lot of, differing opinions coming out of there. But in looking at the particular Seagram's insider trading stuff, and that the SEC was tipped off that Epstein knew something about it, and Epstein leaves, so there's no blowback for the bank, because at this point, right, his mentor is the head of the bank that could obviously have impacts all the way up at Bear Stearns, right? And another thing that's interesting is just a couple... around that same time, the person who had been the legal counsel for Bear Stearns most of the time that Epstein was working for that bank became CIA director under Reagan, Bill Casey.
So these links, by the way, if you go on Donald Barr, because we went through that very quickly. Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr. Okay, so that's Donald Barr. When he was at Dalton, just to kind of put into perspective for the audience, how big of a deal is the school Dalton?
Well, from what I understand, it's kind of one of the, I'm not from New York City, and I've never been there, so, I don't have like an insider understanding necessarily of that. But from what I understand, a lot of, elite, wealthy people
went to the school,
send their children there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when he hired Epstein to become a professor teaching mathematics, this is a guy that's never had a degree before, right? Like Epstein never got a degree.
No, he would have not been eligible, as I understand it, to even teach in public school in New York.
How does that make any sense for him to get a job teaching, even though he's never had a degree before?
Right. So Donald Barr apparently hired unconventional teachers and was known for this, right? But he actually left by the time Epstein started. Hiring decisions were apparently made in the spring, and that summer Donald Barr left after having made those hiring decisions. So during most of Epstein's time there, it was another headmaster. And from what I understand, Donald Barr's him leaving the Dalton School was rather acrimonious. Like he was sort of forced out, it seems, by angry parents and some angry teachers.
Yeah. So apparently he was there till what? Summer of '94 is when you're forcing me to do so much research. It's not even funny.
I think it's like 74.
74. Yeah. That's summer of '74, and then Epstein started working months prior to that, right? Like in '73, teaching physics, and you don't have a 4-year degree. That's incredibly weird to me.
Well, it's weird that he was hired, considering that he couldn't even have taught at public school.
Is this Epstein or Bill Barr's father we're talking about right here?
Well, in
as far as
who
was teaching?
No. Donald Barr hired Epstein.
Got it.
But Epstein didn't have a 4-year degree to teach anything, even in...
Yeah, he didn't graduate from undergraduate.
Yeah, so just think about it. And then, by the way, the one thing that's also pretty weird with this whole connection is Donald Barr wrote a book
Space relations.
Yes, space relations. Published a science fiction novel that contained several prominent references to and descriptions of rape and sexual slavery.
Sex slavery. That's true. And that was published shortly after he left the Dalton School. So there's a weird mix here, right? But, I mean, you can't make any direct connection necessarily, but given everything else we're talking about Epstein, intelligence, the sex crimes, all of that, it starts to look kind of, weird, this far back. But, obviously over time it gets...
Can you do me a favor and just pull up the following? Pull up the text I just sent you. And the only reason I'm showing this is because I know the folks at YouTube value Snopes because they want things to be looked at. And you know how, if you can pull that up. But while you're doing that, the strange part of the story is the fact that the person that ends up putting Epstein in jail is Donald Barr's son, William Barr.
Well, at this exact time when Donald Barr hires Jeffrey Epstein and all of this is going on at the Dalton School, William Barr is already at the CIA.
William Barr's already at the CIA.
Mm-hmm. That's where he started his career pretty much.
In 73, 74.
I think it was after. Well, so Epstein, I think it started in 74. Right. So as I mentioned earlier, Donald Barr made hiring decisions in the spring, leaves that summer, and then Epstein starts that fall semester. And in the same period of time, William Barr's already associated with the CIA,
So for the folks at YouTube and others, here's Snopes. Okay, so we're fact-checking this. Did Bill Barr's father mentor Jeffrey Epstein and write a bizarre novel?
Okay, so if I can comment on that, we're not talking. I didn't say anything right now. We haven't said anything about there being a mentor relationship,
sure.
right? It was a hiring decision,
right?
So a lot of times with these fact check sites, they'll put in like, "Oh, there was no mentor relationship," and then they debunk the whole thing. But Donald Barr did write a bizarre novel. Yeah, and he did hire Jeffrey Epstein.
Can you pull up a little bit?
Facts right there.
Hang on, but let's see what these guys are saying because these guys, people follow
false.
These guys. Mostly false. So go up, go up, go up, go up, go up, go up. So okay, down at the top. Let me read that one first. Claim: Donald Barr, father of U.S. General Bill Barr, hired Jeffrey Epstein as a teacher, served as his mentor, and wrote a novel about men raping teenage girls. Okay, go to the bottom. Mostly false. What's true? Donald Barr was headmaster of Dalton School in New York until the summer of 74. In 74, Epstein began working as a math and physics professor at the school. In 1973, Barr published a science fiction novel that contained several prominent references to and descriptions of rape and sexual slavery. What's false is Dalton is not an all-girls school and was not so when Epstein worked there. The claim that Barr was Epstein's mentor appears to be more than an idle speculations unsupported by evidence. Barr's novel does not celebrate slavery or sexual violence against underage girls, and in one instance, the protagonist brutal murders another character to avenge the rape of a teenage girl.
Right. So I wasn't familiar with the date of the publication of the book, but I knew it was around the ballpark, the same time that he's hiring Epstein, so I didn't know it was earlier, but I've never heard the claim that it was an all-girls school. As far as I understand, it was at this time.
I mean, who would want to write a book like that?
Both genders. But I haven't read the book. I've only read parts of it, but from what I understand, there is like a sex slavery thing, but not necessarily for like minors, right? But it is an odd book, to be sure.
Whitney, I know we're going to go a bunch of different directions, but what I want to sort of hunker down on is what's the importance of this narrative that we're creating right now, or not that we're creating, that we're discussing, with Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr, Epstein. What's the importance of this
more broadly,
part of the story?
I would say this is the beginning of several other examples in Epstein's career where it seems like he has a meteoric rise that would otherwise have been unavailable to him if it weren't for some sort of connections that he possessed. He's stepping into some sort of support network that protects him, not just through his, financial criminality, but his sex criminality. Because remember, he was doing this for a long time, including the sex crimes, and nothing happened to him. I mean, you have someone like in January 2020, you have Cindy McCain, John McCain's wife, coming out and say, we all knew what Epstein was doing. I mean, and there's no direct John McCain-Epstein connection that I've seen. So this means, in the U.S. Senate, it's known what he's doing and nothing happens to him. You don't operate like that and abuse thousands of girls and get away with all of this stuff if you don't have someone behind you, right?
So this is just a case example, sort of an initial case example of like this sort of meteoric rise.
He shouldn't have been teaching.
Social climbing.
Yeah.
How does this happen?
Yeah.
There's something behind the scenes here, and this is sort of the first
he
narrative of
wasn't
that.
even qualified to teach public school, right? So he's teaching at one of the most elite, schools in New York, and it's kind of odd.
This is at
he
age
would be
20.
there.
I did the math. This was in 1973. He was born in 1953, give or take. So he's college age, give or take, at this point.
Yeah, I believe so. Somewhere. But he didn't graduate from college, right? So it's just unusual that he'd be in that circumstance at this elite school. And then it's again unusual that the head, one of the top guys at Bear Stearns would be like, come work for my bank, a guy that hasn't graduated from college and all this stuff. And it's supposedly because he mentored his daughter or his son. I mean, there's a lot of discrepancies because the daughter was like, no, nothing to do with me. And then other people were like, yes. And no one wants to say they had any association with him.
It's a very basic question because we can go, laundry list of the nasty, crazy things he's done. But very simply, was he a very smart guy? Like as far as like anyone who around him was like, oh, he's really smart. That guy knows what he's doing. Yeah. As far as just basic IQ and basic, education.
Well, you've had a mix of responses, right? Since he became infamous, of people being like, yeah, he was really smart, and then other people being like, no, he was just a schmoozer and charismatic, and that was it. And he just bamboozled people. And I think the latter is sort of people trying to go back and rewrite history to an extent. I think he was very good at I mean, obviously he graduated from high school really young, but I think his real, knack for stuff had to do with his, financial abilities.
Let me just put it to you this way. You're not going to get away for this long if you're not smart, or even there's a better word for it.
Cunning,
not cunning, it's conniving, where you can get away with, manipulating people for this long.
Yeah.
There's brilliance there.
He had a skill set that made people a lot of money. And that's part of why he got away with this for so long.
So let's talk, the skill set you're talking about is sex blackmail. Is that what you're talking about?
I think that's part of it. But as far as it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, it looks like that sex blackmail angle didn't really start until the early 90s. And this is a person, we're talking about Epstein in the 70s right now. Then there's the whole question mark of the 1980s and Jeffrey Epstein. And I would say that, like I mentioned earlier, the financial crime angle is just as important as the sex crime angle with Epstein. And it's also the least explored when you're talking about this guy.
So what do we not know? What do we not know about the 80s?
Okay, so he leaves Bear Stearns. I sort of mentioned there was this insider trading investigation, all of that. And then Epstein goes on to claim that he's a financial bounty hunter. That's his term for it. And there's numerous quotes in mainstream media of people that knew Epstein that were told during this period that he was a person who claimed to find or hide money for powerful people. So he's either finding money that was looted, or he's helping people hide looted money. So right there, you know that he's involved in some sort of financial gray area and that he has a very good working knowledge of the offshore banking system. I mean, that we can deduce from that, right? I think that's pretty...
So how does that help him? So it's a financial bounty. Okay, I get that. But the bounty people I know, they're...
He calls himself a bounty hunter, a financial bounty hunter. That's his term.
He's used that terminology before, you're saying?
Yeah, this is in mainstream media. Yeah.
A financial bounty hunter. There's only a handful of ways you're able to get that.
But either way, whether you're helping people find money that was stolen or helping people hide their stolen money, you know where that money goes. And this, the labyrinth of where that money is hidden, you know it better than anyone. And that's why people go to you.
So the blackmail part is the creative one. So in the insurance industry, there's something called premium financing. In premium financing cases, pay a lot of commissions. We're talking $5, $10 million of commissions. One guy is doing a premium financing case with a big billionaire guy, and I'm not going to tell the story of who's who, but he takes the client away from the competitor. So the competitor who was about to close this case is going to get paid $5-something million, is upset, and says, you got to give this client to me because it's mine. The other guy's like, I'm not going to take the client. I'm not going to give the client to you. He says, no problem. He has 3 people that work for him, all drop-dead gorgeous girls. They go and investigate, because a lot of times these successful people, they eat at the same place, they sit at the same place, so it's easy to find them. He goes, creates an environment where the girl, it's the same script. She's going through a husband beating, all this stuff, and she says, I'm so sorry, sits at the same place at the bar. Eventually invites him back to her room. They go upstairs. They do what they do. He leaves. The videotapes. The insurance guy sends to the other guy, says, if you don't give me that client back, this is going to your wife, to your clients, to your employees, to everybody. So this is something, as weird as it sounds, this is not a abnormal thing. This goes on quite often. Yeah, in these circles specifically.
Sure.
So knowing what you know, when you call yourself a financial bounty hunter. Have you been able to investigate and see what his methods were to get the money back?
Unfortunately, it's super murky. There's very little we do know, but from what we do know, it is pretty interesting. So it seems like Epstein during this period had some sort of a relationship with a bank known as Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. According to the BCCI report, which is a U.S. Senate report, BCCI was involved in sex trafficking of minors. Apparently for VIPs and other people, whatever that means, I don't know, but some of them were prepubescent. And this is coming straight from the Senate report, right? Very underexplored aspect of this case. The more you look at BCCI, it seems like, it was nominally a bank, a development bank, but really it's, to me, sort of more like a private intelligence apparatus, sort of masquerading as a bank. A lot of intelligence involvement from the beginning, apparently Pakistani intelligence, but there was also, reports in Newsweek going decades back, of course, because BCCI imploded in 1991, saying that the CIA had some sort of role in creating BCCI and was very involved in money laundering and all other sorts of stuff, this particular bank. And Stephen Hoffenberg, who was a mentor to Jeffrey Epstein at some point, later in the 1980s, has said that Jeffrey Epstein had a relationship with this bank. And we know from people like Vicky Ward, for example, that during this financial bounty hunter phase, one of Epstein's main clients was Adnan Khashoggi, the arms dealer, who had a relationship with many intelligence agencies.
Khashoggi, as in Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist?
They're related.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Crazy how this web
Oh,
of
yeah. I mean, it's very nuts. Yeah. But I don't know if I necessarily, am qualified to talk about the Jamal Khashoggi case. But
just these names that keep popping up.
Yeah.
Bill Barr, what does he have to do with this? Khashoggi journalist.
Yeah.
Clinton, Trump, this,
Well,
Epstein,
the
MI6.
intelligence thing being confirmed from someone like Alex Acosta, he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence, and you're talking about all these names. They have all these different intelligence affiliations. It starts to become clear there's something much deeper to the Epstein case that, mainstream media isn't interested in touching at all. But anyway, Adnan Khashoggi, during this period in the 1980s, one of his main banks was also BCCI. And this is the same time when Adnan Khashoggi starts to put a lot of this stuff that later becomes known as Iran-Contra into motion, which also involves, of course, drug trafficking, money laundering, arms trafficking. It's a very complex.
Which Pat is very familiar with the Iran-Contra affair.
So let's keep going back to the 80s. So is that pretty much all we know about what happened with him in the 80s?
With the financial bounty hunter stuff. Well, the other thing is too, right? So, Bill Casey had this relationship with Bear Stearns. He's CIA director. Epstein leaves, and then he teams up with someone like Adnan Khashoggi. And then around the same time, two other people take on Adnan Khashoggi as clients. Robert Keith Gray, who worked very closely with Bill Casey on the Reagan campaign, and Roy Cohn, the lawyer, who also worked very closely with Bill Casey on the Reagan campaign. And as I note in volume 1 of my book, both of those men have very extensive ties to sexual blackmail.
Roy Cohn does.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally.
Now, Roy Cohn was a lawyer for a lot of mobsters, for many of the mobsters.
Yes.
And many powerful people in New York. He was the guy you got when, you needed somebody to take care of you. Now, is Roy Cohen's story at all linked to J. Edgar Hoover, or no? Is there any connection between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I write about it pretty extensively. They were very close, and even Roy Cohn's probably one of his best-known biographers, Nicholas von Hoffman, that wrote Citizen Cone, just couldn't really even explain why the official story of J. Edgar Hoover and Roy Cohn's meeting. He just found it very odd because it was so uncommon at that time for someone to just waltz in to J. Edgar Hoover's office and have that kind of access to him right away. But there's been several authors, and I document this all in volume 1 pretty extensively, that point to there having been some sort of relationship previously, that they had met previously through some sort of weird sexual, it seems to have been a sexual blackmail operation, and Roy Cohn later apparently admitted this to an NYPD detective. There was some sort of sexual blackmail thing going on that entrapped J. Edgar Hoover, and Roy Cohn participated, not necessarily in entrapping J. Edgar Hoover, but they had these sex parties, right? And so J. Edgar Hoover was seen at these, Roy Cohn was seen as these, and a guy that was close to both Hoover and Cohn, Louis Rosenstiel, who was a liquor baron of that particular area, was also sort of in this same circuit, and it's alleged that this all took place at the Plaza Hotel.
It's important to say this real quick while you're going through this. Everything that you write about is primary sources, right? It's not for the most part, you're going through primary sources.
Or, so in the case of this, a lot of it comes from books, different books written by people that are sourced that way from interviews and things like that.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, anyone that looks in the book and goes through the footnotes of what I write about is going to find like very high quality sourcing.
Sure. So with Roy Cohn and J. Edgar Hoover, so you're not saying Roy Cohn was involved in the sexual blackmail against J. Edgar Hoover is why, the mob was able to say, so Roy wasn't involved at all to corner J. Edgar Hoover so he can help the mob. That was not the connection.
Not necessarily, but they seem to have been in this. They attended these same sex parties that the mob was apparently using to blackmail people. And when Roy Cohn admitted his involvement, he apparently admitted to this NYPD Vice Squad detective that he was involved in these kind of operations, but that he only did it because he had been entrapped. Originally, so this NYPD detective had like he when I interviewed him, he expressed us like some sympathy towards Cohn, like he felt bad for him. But Cohn did this stuff because he was apparently entrapped at some point. And you have to keep in mind this is a period of time when it's very difficult to be a gay man in DC. So a lot of this stuff is sort of like underground. And, if it were to come out that they were homosexual, it could have ended their political careers.
Both of them, him and J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh, absolutely.
Roy
and
Cohn
that's why the blackmail was so effective,
right,
I think,
absolutely.
in this period.
And by the way, even Roy Cohen's assistant, who was with him, they call him, he was his lover. He died in 1984 from AIDS. That's Roy Cohen's assistant who died in 1984 from AIDS. And that's the AIDS pandemic where everybody was talking about.
Roy Cohn also died from AIDS.
You're right, I know, but the point being is his assistant died from it, and then boom, the same thing happened with him.
Are the stories with J. Edgar Hoover? He was the director of the CIA.
FBI.
I'm sorry, FBI. The stories about cross-dressing and high heels. How much truth is in that?
Okay, so there's a couple different sources from that. So one is Susan Rosensteel, or I think that's her name if I'm not mistaken. It's Louis Rosensteel's fourth wife is a source for that. And then there was a separate source. There were 2 or 3 separate sources unrelated to Susan Rosensteel that corroborated that claim.
So when there's that many sources, it's almost like when there's smoke, there's fire. How much?
Well, it's when it's corroborated, I mean, I feel like then it's possible to report it. I mean, people can make their own conclusions. I mean, there's some people I think that have a very vested image in the image of Hoover that we're all told. So there'll be people. It doesn't matter how much you corroborate it. There'll be people who won't believe it.
Do you believe that, Pat?
That what?
About J. Edgar Hoover and cross-dressing and
if I'm going to put odds, nothing is 100% because I wasn't there to witness it while he was getting it on. But I would say 90%.
Oh, that high?
I think so.
Wow.
I don't think it's a issue anymore.
His secret life with like Clyde Tolson and that he was a homosexual and all of this is well known. Wow. And there's even been like Bill Clinton speeches from the 90s where he sort of references that about J. Edgar Hoover and everyone laughs in the room, right? So like there may be some stuff that isn't known necessarily to the American public, but like in these elite circles in DC, stuff gets out,
so
right?
My question about elite circles, we constantly hear this word elite, the elites, the rich elites, the global elites, the elites. These days in America, everything's so fracturized. I'm on Team Red, I'm a Democrat, I'm
very
polarized, blue, very polarized, right? And one thing I always say is like, I don't care about the blue, I don't care about the red, I follow the green, right? It's all about the money. Follow the money, right?
Oh, right. I agree with you there, yeah.
These themes that we're talking about with J. Edgar Hoover back in the 50s and beyond that, JFK and to the 80s and Reagan and Clinton in the 90s up until today and Trump, there seems to be like 3 common themes: money, power, and sex. And that just sort of pierces through everything. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Those are the major 3 things probably that are a common thread throughout my book, because my book really starts back in like the 40s and goes up. And so, yeah, I mean, through those decades, that's what makes the world go around as far as the U.S. is concerned in power. Because, a lot of people look at the politicians and think that's the power, right? But who is backing those politicians and who's backing those backers? And to paraphrase J.R. or Tolkien, who's the banker of those backers, right? So there's like always these different layers of power. And talking about someone like Roy Cohn had a system called the favor bank system, which is what he called it, and everyone he interacted with had an open account in his favor bank, and you either, do deals with him or you go against him and you get plus or minuses, and, you make all these unsavory alliances, especially New York City, to stay in power, and things like that. And Roy Cohn learned a lot of this just growing up as a very young boy. He was not typical. He was very interested in power and accumulating it for a very young age, and he was very close to, like, very prominent mob-leaked businessmen like Generoso Pope, who was the father of one of his best friends growing up, and had this. He was very close to Frank Costello, the mobster, and ran one of the biggest cement companies or concrete companies in New York. Obviously, very important to real estate and very close to organized crime. Very politically powerful because he had a monopoly on the Italian language newspapers in New York for Italian immigrants. So he basically controlled that voting bloc to a significant degree. And so, Roy Cohn had sort of an inside track into how all these deals are made behind closed doors with businessmen and politicians. His father was a very prominent judge with the Democratic Party. And at this point, the Democratic Party in New York, a lot of that power base is unions, and the mob took over a lot of the unions very early on in the 20s and the 30s. And there are even some cases I note in the book where, they wanted a mob-backed politician in power. They threatened the life of some guy, and then they just put the mob guy in. And this is back in the 30s. Have things really changed? I don't necessarily think that it has. I think more mainstream media willingness to look at those cases has declined steadily with the years, because what kind of journalist wants to take those kind of risks, right? Wow. Especially if you live in the swamp that you're writing about.
Pat, let me get your opinion, because this is mind-blowing to me. I don't know if there's anybody on the planet like Pat that has interviewed collectively business people, political figures, and mob people.
Oh, really?
Like if you put those three trifecta together, Pat is, venture to say, I don't know if anybody's on your level in that regard. You've interviewed Rudy Giuliani and kind of how they compare, what the mob does and political figures. Like when you're processing all this, you brought up Frank Costello.
Right.
Like when you're hearing these common themes, like how are you processing all this?
No, I mean, listen, I can see this happening. Because the easiest way to get somebody, like you ever see somebody that flips? Like even the conversation came up with Joe Manchin. We're talking about why did he all of a sudden go from not supporting to supporting? What happened there? What happened with Colonel Powell go from where he was at to all of a sudden flipping? Why do some people all of a sudden dramatically flip? Which makes no sense. You were loyal 60 years to this cause, then dramatically you go XYZ. Did somebody have something on you? Is somebody calling and saying, take a look at this picture, take a look at this video, take a look at this? I'm not telling you to do this. All I'm saying to you is, if you don't, there are people much more powerful than me that are going to probably leak this to the public, and I don't want your reputation to be ruined in the face of your kids and all that other stuff. There are very few people that are willing to say, go ahead, do it. I don't care. Go ahead. Do. Very, very few people. Matter of fact, I'm willing to say it's 0.0001%, because these same people that are driven by power, sex, and money are also driven by legacy and their reputation. And so the moment you risk their legacy and reputation, that's the ultimate control. But you want to talk about the ultimate slave? The ultimate slave is when somebody has that kind of dirt on you. For the rest of your life, you have to do whatever they tell you to do at the sacrifice of anything. So has that happened? Was the mob involved for doing this? The mob wants to control and have power over you. Back in the days, the way they did it, they had many creative ways of doing it. I don't see this not being the case. But let's go back into the 40s, because there's a lot of names when we go back to the 40s. So my interest in the following is this. Here's what my interest is. Anybody that becomes a high-level criminal in any industry saw it through somebody else. Typically, someone taught them how to do this.
Yeah.
It's not like they accidentally picked this up. Somebody taught them how to do this. Few of them, maybe they're inspired by a book they wrote, a book they read, or a movie they watched. But for the most part, they saw someone do it. So Epstein goes back. Dalton brings him in. Who taught him the sex blackmail model, though? You don't know that, right?
No, it's very hard to know. I'm sure there's some people who claim they know, but, frankly, from what I've seen, it's very hard to know. But I think it's more likely it took place somewhere in the 1980s. It was probably either BCCI or even someone like Adnan Khashoggi, right? Adnan Khashoggi had a yacht, and he was accused of having a harem of women on that yacht, and he would use that to butter up politicians, private businessmen, whoever he needed to, help him accomplish his goals, which, more often than not was, selling weapons deals, right? So, there's a lot of different places it could have come from. Like I mentioned earlier, BCCI was sex trafficking on basically an industrial scale. And as I note in the book, the way it's described what they were doing in the BCCI report, very similar to what Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell later did. There was a woman he was working with in that BCCI report. So this is the creator of BCCI and a woman in Pakistan, because they were trafficking women from Pakistan mainly to the elites of the United Arab Emirates. It was probably more extensive than that, and it's sort of acknowledged in the BCCI report, but what that report documents is this Pakistan to UAE pipeline. And it's honestly very disturbing. But the way it describes what this woman was doing in advancing this sex trafficking operation there, very similar to the role Ghislaine Maxwell would later go on to play with Jeffrey Epstein.
I have a question about these women. And I mean, yachts, boats, women. I mean, I grew up in South Beach. This is every weekend, right? This is not a big deal at all, except for this. So women, I mean, there's no secret guys like beautiful women. I don't think that's a controversial topic. This tale as old as time. Yeah. But these young women, these underage women, my question is this. Is it used for blackmail? Are they a pawn in a deeper game? Or are they just sick fucks that actually like younger women? Meaning, oh, I'm into 15, 16-year-old girls. Or no, I'm into hot women. You tell them that they're 18, 20, 21, whatever. Well, it actually turned out she was 16, dude. And we have pictures to prove it. And we're going to use it as blackmail. Which one is it?
I think it can be, it really depends. It could be both, really, depending on the person. I mean, look at Jeffrey Epstein. In Jeffrey Epstein's case, I think he was definitely doing the gotcha stuff and the ladder stuff to people. I think that's pretty clear. But in addition, you know, when he tried to justify himself to journalists after his first arrest, he would be like, now listen, historically, the age of consent wasn't 16, and it's not that weird. You know, once they hit puberty, like, game on, basically, is what he was saying. And people have pointed to... I think it's an op-ed piece that Alan Dershowitz wrote, in I think the early 2000s or late 90s, don't know the exact date, but he says something like, you know, it should really be once girls start menstruating.
Dershowitz said this?
Yes.
This is why his name constantly gets brought up.
You know, there's allegations against him, obviously, but...
He's talked about it, and he's responded to it in interviews, like... People have asked
He's very direct about it, but I think that's part of his strategy. I think he feels like if he shirks away from it, people will assume guilt, and I think he thinks he has a better chance of, you know, protecting his reputation if he confronts it head on. But I don't, you know, the court of public opinion, as far as Dershowitz is concerned, I think a lot of people seem to agree with the allegations. But again, it's hard to know. You know, when it comes to Epstein, you know, if your name gets associated with him, even Epstein acknowledged in early 2019, you know, he's radioactive is the word he used to describe himself after his first arrest.
Two things. Let's talk about when the connection came with Clinton and then when he met Ghislaine. Which happened first? He met Ghislaine first, then he met Clinton.
Yeah, so with Ghislaine Maxwell, it's publicly claimed that they met in late 1991 or so. Their first public appearance together was when he sat next to her and her mother at a tribute to Robert Maxwell shortly after his death that was at the Plaza Hotel in New York. But, you know, that was sort of, in my opinion, more of a coming out of their public relationship and this close association that followed from that point on of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. I note in the book that there's differing allegations, and people are open to make up their, you know, their own conclusions about it, that they met years prior. And there's also allegations from people that worked with Robert Maxwell when he was doing stuff for Israeli intelligence, including former Israeli intelligence agents, that Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other in the mid-1980s and worked together on intelligence stuff, and that Ghislaine Maxwell had sort of brought Epstein into the fold because they had some sort of romantic relationship in this.
Who had the romantic relationship?
Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine before 1991. That's the claim.
Is that how you would, like, how would you describe their relationship? Were they friends? Were they lovers? Were they business partners? Was it all the above? Was it weird? Yeah. Was it sex?
I think after 1991, it was definitely very business partner stuff. There's been a lot of this stuff out there to absolve Ghislaine, I think, in a sense, where they say, oh, she was just enamored with him and that's why she did everything. I think it's much more complicated than that. And the reason I think they've been able to sell that narrative so well is because they just totally ignore her father and her relationship with her father. Her father dies, and she's used to being in this particular relationship with a man, in this case her father, who dominates her life and runs it basically for her and has for years, and then he's dead, and what does? She goes to someone who's just like Robert Maxwell.
So it's important to find out more about Robert Maxwell because he himself was a very, very interesting character. What do we know about Robert Maxwell?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, we could fill up the whole podcast talking about Robert Maxwell, to be honest. Really? But really, his intelligence connections are a matter of record. He was very closely associated with Israeli intelligence. He was also closely associated with figures in Soviet and Eastern European intelligence to a significant degree, an alleged relationship with British intelligence. I mean, it seems like he could have been a double or triple agent very involved with intelligence stuff. And that's why it's complicated when we talk about intelligence affiliations. Oh, people are like, Robert Maxwell was just Mossad. Well, it's more complicated than that. These people are interested in money and power for themselves a lot of times. So if it means, helping these guys out and helping these guys out, having your hands in as many pies as possible to rake in more money for you and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of these guys seem to do that. And Robert Maxwell was definitely a guy that sort of seemed to not just straddle different intelligence agencies, but also intelligence and organized crime, which is another big theme of the book. So looking at Robert Maxwell around the end of the 1980s or so, he went into business with Eastern Bloc mobsters in a big way. People like Semyon Mogilevich, whose name has come up, for example, like when mainstream media talks about Donald Trump and the Russian mob and all of this stuff, it all goes back to Semyon Mogilevich, but they won't acknowledge that he was a business partner of Robert Maxwell, and you have Donald Trump partying on the Lady Ghislaine, Robert Maxwell's yacht, in the same period in the late 80s and all of this stuff. So is it really more of the Maxwell mafia or the Russian mafia, right? There hasn't really been an interest in connecting, those dots, right? And I think it's interesting, too. You look at Donald Trump's reaction to Jeffrey Epstein's arrest. He wants to distance himself. I'm not a fan, right? And then Ghislaine Maxwell gets arrested. I wish her well, he says. And people like that used to be pretty close to this nexus, like Stephen Hoffenberg, say that Trump was much closer to the Maxwell side than the Epstein side.
From the father's side, Robert.
Yeah, and that it continued, that his affiliation with Epstein and Ghislaine after Robert Maxwell's death, talking about Donald Trump, was because that he was closer to Ghislaine than Epstein necessarily.
Well, let me ask you this. How was Trump's relationship with the Murdoch family?
I'm not exactly familiar with that, but
because these guys were competitors. Maxwell and Murdoch were not
were competitors, yeah. But Trump's mentor was Roy Cohn, right? And so Roy Cohn had a friendly relationship with Murdoch.
Got it.
So
and these guys are going at it, and this character Robert Maxwell could have been like a Great Gatsby character, because he would tell the stories, and half the stories you don't know if it's real or not, but at that time you kind of have to believe it.
He's been described as like narcissistic, a very, very big on self-promotion, very, he was determined to make himself and his family sort of like the next Kennedys. He wanted to make a dynasty of power. That was what he was interested in. Robert Maxwell, yeah. And one of the top FBI special agents in New York, John Patrick O'Neill, went on record saying that Robert Maxwell, before he died, set into motion a global coalition of criminals, that he basically made a major successful effort to bring together organized crime factions from around the world into like a global, basically criminal conglomerate, at the same time that he has all these intelligence affiliations. Wow. And that's pretty significant, right?
Keep going.
Well, I was just going to say that O'Neill said, if you look into that guy's career specifically, he was sort of headhunted to be head of the security at the World Trade Center, and he started just days before 9/11, and he was sort of pushed out of the FBI. But before he left the FBI and he made these statements to author Gordon Thomas. He said, I have people looking in, still trying to unravel the Maxwell legacy in New York. And this is a decade after Robert Maxwell's death.
You got to realize this guy was born, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, right? And then his parents and his 4 siblings get killed at a Auschwitz.
I don't know if it was a camp, but they definitely did die. But there were also pogroms and all sorts of stuff where
they died in the hand of the Nazis.
They're believed to have died.
Yeah, they died in the hand of. He fought against the Nazis for the British military, and so then later on he goes into wanting to compete in media, the whole Mirror, and then he owned 51% of MTV. It's kind of weird. This guy owned 51% of MTV. Robert,
he owned 51% of MTV.
He was building a massive
he owned 51%.
Empire.
This guy's like 51% of MTV, and then
this is Ghislaine Maxwell's father,
Robert Maxwell. So, and then Ghislaine is the last child, the ninth child.
The youngest.
Yeah.
And his favorite after the eldest son is injured the eldest son is injured. I think Michael Maxwell, he dies after being in a vegetative state for several years. He was the favorite child, then had this awful car accident, and then Ghislaine, Ghislaine was born around the same time that happened with her older brother, and so the family basically neglected her for the first couple years of her life, and she developed a childhood anorexia and stuff, and had a lot of problems with feeling even acknowledged by her own family, which obviously is going to have psychological stuff implications for her, obviously, and then it doubles back, and then she becomes the favorite child. So you have that neglect, and then you go to being favorite child. There's you sort of see
Robert
the psychology
Maxwell
start there.
9 kids, you saying?
I think it's 7.
Okay, so all these kids, was it with the same woman, and where were they all born? Do you know?
Okay, yeah,
All the
it was Betty Maxwell is the wife, and very complicated relationship there because Robert Maxwell was not faithful. And
Doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's the faithful
but
guy.
she was very faithful and very devoted. So I feel kind of sad for her, to be honest. But he was not faithful. But he wanted his children to be sort of like arms of his empire, right?
Yeah.
But 2 of them are estranged, I believe. I forget their names. One went away to Argentina, and the other one, he was not very nice to a lot of his kids. He was known to like verbally abuse Kevin and Ian, and then the daughter that's estranged, he insulted her appearance a lot, and that may have affected.
Pat, is there any doubt in your mind that he was an intelligence asset, Robert Maxwell?
I just started looking into this a couple days ago because it's all her fault. I mean, I literally just started looking into this a couple
Whitney.
days ago.
I'm not the first, though, with Robert
yeah.
Maxwell. Seymour Hersh published a book called The Samson Option, Why Robert Maxwell Was Still Alive, alleging a relationship with Israeli intelligence. And in Britain, the libel laws are very strong. So Robert Maxwell sued over that intelligence claim, and he did not win.
Did not win.
And by the way, here's
So Seymour Hersh was right. So we'll just leave that there. As far as I'm concerned, it's extensively documented, the affiliation with Israeli intelligence.
And he names his yacht, the $50 million yacht he buys, Lady Ghislaine.
After his favorite child.
But
it's a little weird, the relationship between Robert
Very
Maxwell
weird.
and Ghislaine.
Right.
For example, Ghislaine commissions pictures for the Lady Ghislaine, and some of them are a bit racy.
What does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, father-daughter relationship. Do you really want like a picture of your daughter with the skirt all the way up here being like, It's weird. I'm not saying I know anything that happened between them, but I think there was a lot of psychological manipulation. And, it seems like Robert Maxwell, at least in my opinion, was kind of narcissistic. A lot of narcissistic parents see no boundaries between them and their children. They see their children as extensions of them. He believed that Ghislaine was the most sexually attractive and the most like him, right? So, a lack of boundaries can mean a lot of things in that particular context, right? And, as I note in the book, chapter 15 specifically, which is about all this stuff, it seems like he was interested in using her sexuality for his benefit, in a PR sort of way, for example, would publish stories in his own papers of alleged affairs of his daughter with elite people, aristocrats in Britain and stuff like that. Even though, the British elites that he would name were, denied any sort of a romantic relationship, Robert Maxwell obviously wanted that out there. And this is the same guy who, with Ghislaine's, boyfriends when she was in high school, didn't want them near the house, didn't want her to date, was very controlling of her romantic life, but at the same time would publish, basically gossip and smutty gossip in his newspapers about her.
I can see most dads not wanting, your teenage daughter around.
But he
boys.
wanted her to marry a Kennedy. That's what he wanted.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Can we
'Cause he
see a
wanted to
picture,
build a
Tyler, of a
political
young
dynasty.
Ghislaine Maxwell? We all know what she looks like now, but young?
Yeah, and after, no one knows how he died. Suicide, what happened
There's a lot
to
of
him.
allegations, but let's look at what Ghislaine Maxwell says. Ghislaine Maxwell believes that he was murdered by rogue Mossad agents and the Sicilian mafia. That's what Ghislaine Maxwell thinks happens to her father.
When does she say that?
I think it's quoted in the New York Post somewhere. I cite it in the book.
She says he was murdered because they.
The other children claim not murder, but she thinks she was the person who, according to British journalists, when he died, she was the one that came down out of all the siblings, came
Right.
to the yacht right after his death, goes on the boat and shreds papers. So that means out of all the kids, if that's true, out of all the kids, she knew what was incriminating and what was not, where it was, and what to shred.
Yeah, and by the way, when he dies, you know who his yacht goes to? His yacht goes to Murdoch's third wife.
Oh, interesting.
Rupert
Yeah,
Murdoch?
It is interesting in the
That's
story.
the part where it's a very, very connection of wanting to compete in media and how
the Murdoch Maxwell stuff was pretty intense. That competition, Murdoch drove Maxwell insane.
Yeah.
By the looks of things, he apparently was willing to stretch his business empire, as far as he could, just to try and stick Murdoch in the eye.
and that includes using $460 or $446 million of his employees' retirement plan.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Did you hear this? Go ahead.
pension fund for
Yeah.
the Mirror. Mm-hmm.
He used his employees' pension
it.
fund to finance what he was doing with the media company, $446 million, and the employees ended up only getting half of it at the end after he died. Because his sons, I think Kevin, and he didn't leave any of his money to Ghislaine. He felt it was appropriate to only leave it to the boys or something like that.
They have trusts in Liechtenstein no one knows about, all right? And the FBI special agents looking at this stuff in New York. You know, Ghislaine apparently came and made the show wearing like rags and like sobbing, like dirty, being like, I have no money, blah, 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 but they didn't believe her. And they were trying to find about all these trusts and stuff that, he was, what Jeffrey Epstein did with money, Robert Maxwell was even better.
So
who knows really where the money went? We don't really know. A lot of the maze of Robert Maxwell's funds, a lot of it is honestly still a mystery.
Then this is where my question goes to. Who had a bigger influence on how to take Epstein's game to the next level? Was it Ghislaine because what she learned from her father, or was it something that who brought more to the table for the crime that they committed, both of them together? Was it more Epstein's background, or was it more Ghislaine's experience?
Well, you mean after Robert Maxwell's death?
Yes.
So I think Ghislaine was looking to continue the same role she was sort of doing for her father, which was being an ambassador for her father, basically in New York,
Right.
and the interests that represented him. His handlers sort of looked to her, and at this time, Jeffrey Epstein is the money manager for Leslie Wexner. And Leslie Wexner is affiliated with a group of very powerful billionaires who, at the same time that Robert Maxwell made his inroads to New York with Ghislaine sort of as the ambassador. Oh, sorry, I lost my train. Oh, yeah. They're quoted in, I think, Vanity Fair of having those billionaires courting Robert Maxwell specifically. So it seems like there was some sort of effort to bring those interests together even before Robert Maxwell died.
This name, Les Wexner, if you're not familiar with it, I mean, go ahead and tell. I mean, this is Victoria's Secret.
shy.
This is the guy that basically created the modern day shopping mall, Abercrombie and Fitch, Bed Bath and Beyond, Victoria's Secret. Like, reveal a little bit about this guy.
Okay, so I mean, he's a retail guy, so I guess the big brands we're familiar with. Yeah, he's the one that backs them, but his rise to power is partly linked to people that built the shopping malls and then leased space to him.
They called him the Merlin of the mall, something of that capacity?
Yeah, I think that's a nickname for Wexner, yeah. But people like Edward De Bartolo, I think is how you pronounce it.
The Bartolo family, they own the 49ers. I mean, this is all coming together. Follow the money, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and then Alfred Taubman, who was another big he built a lot of shopping malls. He's one of the guys that he's considered a mentor to Wexner, as is Max Fisher, and these are guys, really powerful people from Detroit, specifically involved in real estate shopping mall stuff. Max Fisher also has a background in oil, but also got into a lot of, he's the guy that made Taubman, I guess, because Taubman built a lot of, I think, the gas station, like convenience stores for the oil company, and then got into retail commercial centers.
The reason I asked about Lex Wexner is because I went down the rabbit hole. You've done multiple interviews with Tim Dillon, right?
Oh, I love Tim.
I know, he's someone that we're in touch.
How do you
with,
not love the guy?
He'll be here pretty soon. But I've watched multiple of your interviews. I'm a fan of Tim Dillon. You know, multiple connections there. But you said, quote unquote, Epstein made his money from links to 3 powerful men, and you said Les Wexner. You said Bill Gates, and then you said Donald Trump.
That's not from me. That's a 2001 article from the Evening Standard, which is a mainstream media publication in the UK, prestigious, right? And it's never been retracted. It's from 2001. But if you believe U.S. mainstream media, Bill Gates and Epstein didn't meet till 2011. And this is 2001.
So there's 10 years of...
There's more than 10 years, I think, with Bill Gates and Epstein, yeah.
Gotcha.
It's pretty crazy that there's an article like that out there from 2001, and mainstream media is like 2011.
What did that article say?
Well, it's talking. So that Evening Standard article is talking mainly about Prince Andrew and who are Prince Andrew's new friends. Oh, it's Ghislaine Maxwell, because obviously, Robert Maxwell's theft of the pension fund money obviously had huge ramifications in Britain. A lot of people, for understandable reasons, didn't like the Maxwell family after that. So a lot of the gossip columns or newspapers would report a lot on what the Maxwell children were doing. They sort of became infamous celebrity children, And so they follow up on them. And then Prince Andrew, circa 2000 or so, is going on vacation after vacation with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And so Jeffrey Epstein is sort of introduced in that article. And they're trying to explain to their audience in Britain in 2001 who Epstein is, because people probably haven't heard of him. Yeah, they all know Ghislaine, they all know Prince Andrew, obviously, but they don't know Jeffrey Epstein. So the introduction to Jeffrey Epstein is they describe him as a property developer. And actually, a lot of early articles on Epstein don't say billionaire, financial advisor, like a lot of the later ones do. They say property developer. There's a real estate connection there, which is I sort of explore.
And then in that article, what's the Gates-Trump connection with all
That's
this?
what the line there is that this is where, Jeffrey Epstein's money comes from. These are his clients, his top clients, basically. And so people know that there was a long-standing Wexner relationship, a long-standing Trump relationship, but it mentions Bill Gates. And at the time, Bill Gates never challenged that article. It was never retracted. Like I mentioned earlier, the UK has very strong libel laws. If it was untrue, he could sue and it could be retracted today, but it's never been done.
When you're going through this rabbit hole and you're kind of researching people, sometimes you do this in business, you do it in sports, you do it in a lot of different things, and then all of a sudden you're trying to go here, then somebody makes you go here. Okay, you're like, wait, what? This guy's more interesting than these guys I was researching. Who did that to you while you're going through the rabbit hole, and all of a sudden there's a personality you're saying this guy could be one of the most powerful guys or influential guys or gals that nobody looked at?
Yeah, I that happens to me a lot. Yeah, especially in looking at this web, and it really is kind of a web. So you end up going in different directions, and really all those different tangents are worth exploring because sometimes there's very important connections there. Sure, yeah.
Who? Anybody?
Well, for example, let's take Leslie Wexner, right? The De Bartolo family had an affiliation with Wexner, and it's actually mentioned in a police report from Columbus, Ohio, that they have organized crime connections. And it discusses that Leslie Wexner, by extension, has several organized crime connections himself, right? So, I didn't... that particular police report, has a lot of very interesting information about Leslie Wexner's business connections and his business associates. But then, if you go beyond that and you look at those names that come up there on their own, you find a lot more information that the organized crime connections are a lot more extensive, for example, than they are in the police report and things like that, or maybe things I've done more recently since that report was written. It's really worth leaving no stone
what's
unturned
crazy?
in these cases.
Have you ever watched the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, ever?
Yeah, but years
Hilarious,
ago.
amazing show. But
Yeah.
to your point, Tyler, pull up this picture I just sent you. Tell me if you've ever seen this image, if we could pull it up. But this is what essentially Pat's question reminds me of that you're doing. That anyone who's ever watched the show
Oh,
will
it's
appreciate.
with
You've
the
seen
wall.
this?
Yeah, sure. It's
Any
it's
like
a meme
making a
too.
murder documentary, going down the rabbit hole. This is what comes to mind. This is where
but
I'm at right now with all this stuff.
but some people use this image, right, to be like, oh, everyone that looks at this kind of stuff and claims there's any sort of web or like decentralized power structure with real pull is insane. And it's sort of this claim when you get called a conspiracy theorist, right? It's sort of this idea that all the stuff we're talking about today, it's just a coincidence. These people have no agency. They don't actually, plan to expand their power and wealth behind closed doors. And I think that's honestly pretty naive.
I got to
be
tell you, I saw
honest.
this comedian yesterday. You know how somebody sends me this clip. What a funny African-American wearing a suit. This thing went viral. Funny. I wish I knew the guy's name to give him credit. If I find it, I'll put it on Instagram for people to see it. So he says, listen, I understand not believing most conspiracy theories, but you mean to tell me you are willing to believe that all of them are conspiracy theories? He says, I have a problem with that. There's no way in the world all conspiracy theories are wrong. No way. There has to be some of them that are right. He says, look, here you have the government that's filled by thousands of powerful people, hundreds of powerful people, and there's 330 million of them, of us, right, that they're going to lie to us. He says, look, I got a son. I love my son. I love him more than anybody in the world. And I want him to live an incredible life. But I got to tell you, he's got one person above him as a father, and it's me. And I lie to that kid all the time. That's the one right there. You send it to me? Oh, my God, that was hilarious. I couldn't stop laughing. Let's put the link below if people want to watch.
He lies to the kid.
He says, I lie to my kid all the time. He says, what makes you think if I, as a parent, lie to my kid all the time, government's not lying to us about different conspiracy theories?
Yeah.
He says, you have to be naive to not believe some of these things that could be true.
Fully agree.
But they put the label and then they discredit somebody that's writing and saying what they're saying and they take one part of it that you got wrong, and automatically they say everything else you said
But
was
It's like
wrong.
that
think
Snopes
about-
mostly false thing. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it was mostly true.
Yeah.
But one little false component.
But think about today. If you're saying something that's true, but the government calls it a conspiracy theory, you can lose. If you're someone like me, you can lose your income. You can be taken off of Patreon. You can be taken off of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube.
Where did you get taken off? Any of those?
I
things?
got taken off of Patreon. Yeah.
Patreon took you off.
Yeah.
What was their reason?
Well, I wrote an article about the affiliations of the creator of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, and that he was affiliated and speaking to the Galton Institute, which was until 1989 the British Eugenics Society, and some of the affiliations of that particular organization. So anyway, they didn't like that.
I mean, eugenics. We can have a whole conversation about
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I got to tell you, I'm on Pat's show, on our show, I'm sort of the skeptic. We have 9/11
Sure.
there, conspiracy theories guys. We've got obviously COVID stuff. We've had priests on that exorcise demons, QAnon type stuff, and I'm very skeptical. On this, I'm not skeptical at all. I'm
Well,
like, okay, questioning things.
I think you're savvy enough to know that a lot of this stuff makes sense when we're talking about the politics of power,
Yes.
and you're about follow the money.
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
That's my point, is that it's,
But-
people want to get political ideology.
Right.
This has nothing to do with politics.
But I mean-
Democrat, Republican, just follow the freaking money here.
Yeah,
See what's
and
going
think
on.
about that with Epstein. This is a guy that's so infamous. Everyone in America probably knows his name, but no one knows that he committed financial crimes.
Oh, he's a sex trafficker. That's what we know
He's
about
just a
him.
sex trafficker,
We know that
right?
he's a financier.
But this is a
and
guy
Bear
that was
Stearns.
involved in one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history with Towers Financial. Even though he was named as being the mastermind of that during grand jury proceedings, his name is dropped from the case, and he ends up at Bill Clinton fundraisers in 1993. And then after that, some of the most controversial fundraisers in Bill Clinton's presidential career, Epstein's there. And then after Clinton leaves office, he's setting up the Clinton Foundation, flying on Epstein's plane around Africa. He credits Epstein for coming up with his HIV/AIDS philanthropy, being involved in creating the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and a lot of people have sort of, argued that the Clinton Foundation is sort of a glorified political slush fund for the Clinton family. So why do you have a financial criminal helping you set up your foundation after he's involved with the most controversial, actually, fundraisers of your political career, after being involved in a major Ponzi scheme, after being a financial bounty hunter involved in the offshore banking complex? It's complicated stuff. There's no interest in looking at this stuff except for maybe the Daily Mail. I'll give you some examples. So the Daily Beast, around the time that Epstein was arrested the second time, came out and noted that Epstein had attended at least 5 meetings at the Clinton White House with a guy named Mark Middleton. Okay. Last December, the Daily Mail obtained the full visitor logs. That number ballooned to 17. It wasn't covered in the U.S. Shouldn't that matter? That it goes from 5 to 17. You have this guy in less than around 2 years going to the White House 17 times. And he's not just meeting with Mark Middleton. His first meeting was Robert Rubin, former head of Goldman Sachs, who, by the way, Goldman Sachs was accused of being a major accessory to Robert Maxwell's financial crimes, including the stuff with the pension funds and all of that, were involved in all of this crazy stuff. So the guy that is running basically the bank that Robert Maxwell is very much tied to. Robert Maxwell dies, and the first guy to bring Jeffrey Epstein into the White House is that banker.
So go to the Clintons. Go to the Clintons. You were talking about everything with the Clintons. Why do so many people, when it comes down to Clintons, get suicided? We hear
I
this
don't
story.
have an answer for that, I mean, I can give you my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear. Why we hear these stories, and then I want to ask you whether you feel Trump has any kind of involvement with Epstein, not in regards to business, but with women, because I have my own theory there as well. But let's start off with the Clintons first.
Okay, so the Clinton stuff is really complicated, and even I, like with the book, I sort of saved some of that stuff for last, and it probably should be its own book, because this Mark Middleton guy, most of his meetings were with Mark Middleton. You have these visitor logs came out right last December. It's 17 visits. It's much more than 5 with Mark Middleton. And then just a few months later, Mark Middleton dies in Little Rock, Arkansas. He was allegedly found hanging by the neck with an extension cord around his neck and a shotgun wound to the chest, and it was labeled a suicide. A local court in Arkansas said that no media front taken at the scene, photos, videos, anything is allowed to be released to the public.
Hold on, what? He was hanging.
Supposedly,
shotgun
this is
hole in his
again. This
chest?
is again from the Daily Mail citing local law enforcement that it's very crazy.
I mean, listen, if you can commit suicide by hanging yourself and shooting yourself with a shotgun in the chest, you're a magician, is what you are. I mean, you're in a league of your own to be able
And
to
so this is right after it comes out that he's meeting the guy that met with Epstein a bunch of the Clinton White House. But it's even crazier than that, because once you start looking into who Mark Middleton was at the White House, it gets crazy really fast. I'll give you an example. George W. Bush comes into office. Are you familiar with the first time Bush invoked executive privilege? Among other things, I think there were 3 things in the particular document that was, that invocation. But one of those 3 was all documents about Mark Middleton not going to Congress, which was investigating Mark Middleton. Why did Bush step in to protect aid to the chief of staff of the White House for Clinton, who's normally, he's not a big fish, right?
Yeah, what was the
Why
reason
is
for
Bush
that?
stepping in for that?
Yeah, what's your theory?
Well, if you look into why Mark Middleton was infamous at that time and why he was being investigated, it's remembered really only by U.S. conservatives today, and they refer to it as Chinagate, which is kind of a largely forgotten political scandal. It's insane once you get into it. I personally think
Chinagate.
I think Chinagate's kind of a misnomer. You do have China involved, but really it's the same. It's some of the families that backed Bill Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas, the Riotti family, Jackson Stevens, these types of figures. When Bill Clinton becomes president, they have a lot of interest in China stuff. And mainly it looks sort of like a lot of tech transfer stuff to China. And so conservatives at the time said it was basically the Clintons selling out U.S. national security on a major scale to the Chinese government, or mainly to firms that were, state-backed and tied up with the Chinese military. And Mark Middleton was one of the guys at the center of this. And Epstein's meeting with him at the same time that Chinagate's active. And oddly enough, in the same period of time, and I mean, this is why it's so crazy, Jeffrey Epstein, on behalf of Leslie Wexner, is involved in moving an airline called Southern Air Transport from Miami, Florida to Columbus, Ohio to run cargo for the Limited. And sorry, I got away from the microphone. And that's the airline that used to be Air America, the CIA airline. Southern Air Transport was involved in the Iran-Contra stuff, moving stuff, the Mena, Arkansas, Barry Seal, the cocaine stuff, all of that was Southern Air Transport. And then just a few years later, it becomes the airline of the Limited, and it's not going from Miami to Latin America anymore. It's going from Columbus, Ohio, involved with Epstein and Wexner. It's going to Hong Kong. And this is the guy, at the same period of time, he's meeting with the Chinagate guy. I mean, there's a lot of really crazy stuff here, and honestly, it would take the whole podcast to unravel it all. I've tried to do my best in the book, but there's really a lot more there, and it's very crazy. And the other guy at the center of this was Commerce Secretary Ron Brown, who agreed to cooperate with an investigation into a lot of this stuff, and then he ends up dead in a plane crash that kills a bunch of people in the Commerce Department that are at the exact part of Commerce, ITA, at the Commerce Department, that was basically the department most targeted by this particular group for Chinagate.
Is this the one where 34 people died and they said there was a radar failure, and then the next day the radar failure guy was killed or suicide?
He was shot in the chest and it was ruled a suicide.
That's just so
It was in Croatia. Ron Brown,
God.
after he agreed to investigate, was told he needed to go on a urgent trade mission to Croatia, and that's when the crash happens. And I think actually Maxine Waters at the time requested there be further investigation because he was found with an odd wound in his head that was consistent with a gunshot wound, and the x-rays disappeared and a lot of crazy stuff.
Maxine Waters wanted it to be investigated?
Yeah, well, actually, like when Gary Webb wrote it, Dark Alliance and all
Right.
this stuff, she also called for there to be investigation, but that doesn't mean it went anywhere,
Maxine Waters, Congresswoman.
Well, I think she was a bit
California.
different in the 90s than she is now, yeah.
No question
Can
about it.
let me just bring this down to earth for a second, because obviously we can go the whole Charlie Day.
Yeah, but the Clinton
is
stuff's
that-
really crazy,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
All these theories and the stuff that we're hearing, and we had a whole conversation about distrust of the media. The stories about politics and Clintons and the media and the lies and the money and not trusting what you're seeing, not taking things at face value. How should the average person, I'm just a normal American, I'm just a normal citizen, paying my bills, got my family, how should they process just the news, in your opinion?
You mean like mainstream media news?
Yeah, just, living my life. I'm just hearing, doing what I'm doing.
Well, I think mainstream media has evolved a lot over the past few decades, right? I think, I've been out of the U.S. This is my first time back in the U.S. in like 8 years. My parents, I was at their house a few days ago. They watch the evening news all the time, like ABC. And when they're talking about a government story, they just cite the government sources, and that's all they say. They don't, look to see if it's true. They don't do any sort of watchdog stuff. They're just telling you what the official story is about really anything. And, to me, that's being more of a stenographer than being a journalist.
I don't want to be a normal person right now. I want to be an abnormal person and go back to Clinton. So let's go back to Clinton's. Okay, so we did Middleton. We did Ron Brown. Who else? When you see the link to these guys, Esther, you got a few of these guys that you can.
I mean, it's so nuts. I mean, I would encourage people to read this part of the book because there's so much detail. It's so convoluted and insane when you get into the stuff about this, and even the congressional reports that were done about Chinagate. I mean, it's totally insane what happened. It's very illegal, and there was a focus on the illegal campaign donations. But it was basically like pay-for-play politics. But it was pay-for-play politics where these illegal campaign donations were being obtained from non-U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
And it was basically buying influence of the Commerce Department that seems to have been signing off on basically tech transfers of sensitive military and other types of technology to our ostensible adversary, and when it wasn't supposed to be sent over there, and also stuff about China's trading status, like most favored nation trading status, because Clinton campaigned on playing hardball with the Chinese about that stuff, and he totally reversed. Right. And a lot of this is because of this one family that backed his political career going way back, named the Riyadis, that are actually Indonesian, but they're ethnic Chinese, and they have a lot of business interests in all of Southeast Asia. They're very big. They're called the Lippo Group. And the Lippo Group and Jackson Stevens, these guys have a relationship with BCCI that we talked about earlier back in the 1980s, and actually tried to save the BCCI Hong Kong branch before its collapse. And that's when they went into business with some of these Chinese government-owned firms. And that's where Chinagate really starts, and it gets really crazy from there on out. But even not talking about Chinagate anymore, you look at the first time Epstein went to a Clinton fundraiser, it was supposed to be for the White House Historical Association, nominally a fundraiser so Hillary Clinton could redecorate parts of the White House. I feel crazy talking about it just because it's so insane. But This fundraiser Epstein was involved in, he was one of the donors to that. You also have one of the guys instrumental in BCCI stuff, like Clark Clifford, who was in the Carter administration and played a major role in BCCI's entry into the U.S. financial system. And then you have a guy named C. Gerald Goldsmith, who tried to run for mayor of Palm Beach once, who has a bunch of ties to offshore banking complex, organized crime. I mean, a lot of the guys, not everyone obviously, but some of the guys that attended this fundraiser are financial guys like that, right? And this fundraiser ends up in Vince Foster's suicide note.
What does that mean?
Are you familiar with Vince Foster?
Yeah, of course.
He was White House counsel. And
For Clinton?
Yeah, and he died. And there's a lot of speculation about what really happened there. Because, he supposedly shot himself in the mouth, but there's no blood at the scene, right? And the autopsy report said it was a mouth-to-neck wound, and then they changed it. On some pages it says that. On some pages it says, it was a regular gunshot wound. And then the people that were at the scene are advised about the autopsy late, and they show up, and all the part of the mouth and neck, the palate, all this stuff is just taken out of Vince Foster, so they can't look at it. Or there's a lot of weird stuff going on there. I mean, I know the specifics about the death in the book and why people suspect something, but it's pretty much a matter of record that when police went into Vince Foster's office after his body was found, there was nothing in his briefcase, and then somehow 36, I think, hours later, the White House claims there was a suicide note that Vince Foster left. And it was apparently Hillary Clinton's office that was responsible for finding that suicide note after this extensive delay. And the only mention of Hillary Clinton in that suicide note is related to this White House Historical Association fundraiser.
So these crazy stories about the Clintons and all these they've done this and suicide, it's like when there's smoke, there's fire kind of a thing. There's credibility here.
I got a question about that we were kind of talking about yesterday. Remember how you were saying Deutsche Bank? We were talking Deutsche Bank yesterday.
Yeah, you constantly hear Deutsche
Bank. Can you talk about Esther Salas, what happened with her as a judge and her son?
So I haven't followed up since the shooting happened, to be honest. So I'm not actually sure how that case has advanced or not. But I know that the case was about to be heard. Esther Salas was the judge overseeing the case related to Deutsche Bank's relationship with Epstein, and how, despite staff, red flagging lots of stuff that he was involved with, nothing happened to him at that particular bank. And there was a shooting at her home. Her teenage son was murdered. And really, if you think about it, since Epstein's second arrest and the case became infamous, that's the only innocent person to die.
Yeah. So,
and that's related to the Epstein's finances. This is, again, why I say the financial crimes, there's a reason this stuff is underreported.
But the part of the story that I want to bring back to Clinton's and some of these other guys is the following. So, guy shows up as a delivery man, shoots the son, wounds the husband, son dies, while this whole thing is going on with Epstein and Deutsche Bank. And then the shooter the next day, or no, not the next day, the same day, is found in a car with a dead with a bullet wound, and he killed himself right after he killed.
That's the narrative. So
Right.
Some people have speculated: is it even the guy that did the shooting, or was it just pinned on him, or who knows? And if you look into the guy who is the alleged shooter, he previously worked for a group called Kroll Associates, which is known as the CIA of Wall Street. They did security on World Trade Center during 9/11. They also investigated many scandals of this particular group I write about in the books, and then found no wrongdoing, even if they acknowledge wrongdoing in the bulk of the report. Their summary is, everything's fine. They investigated people like Adnan Khashoggi and Imelda Marcos for all those financial things. I think Covenant House. Lots of stuff. Robert Maxwell hired them right before his death. Very interesting firm, to say the least. And actually, French intelligence alleged a few times that they were an actual front for the CIA Kroll Associates. But if you look at who's made up a lot of their staff historically in terms of intelligence connections, it seems to come mostly from either U.S. or Israeli intelligence at Kroll Associates.
How many murders are linked back to Clinton's? What's the number? I've heard
I
74.
have no idea, but I'm sure people link all sorts of stuff to them. And I think there are some that we could link, and then there are some that maybe are a little more speculative, depending on who's making the list, right?
So here's my question. I'm going to be the skeptic here, and my question is the following. So if somebody does things like this, like RFK, when I asked him about the murder of his father, Robert Kennedy, he went out. He wrote a book about it, on what they did to him and his uncle, right? I mean, if something like that happens to you that closely to you, you're probably going to spend the rest of your life wanting to find out what happened to get to the bottom of it, right? Okay. Are most people going to want to seek vengeance? I don't know. Of course, most will not. Most are going to be like, oh, I'm going to do something, and they're not going to do anything about it, and life kind of goes on. In most tragic events that happens, people generally move on a couple years later, and life kind of happens. You're worried about, well, it's going to affect the other kids, this, that, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But if you've ever seen that one movie with Gerard Butler, what's the movie's name? We were talking about it yesterday. Law-Abiding Citizen, where somebody kills his daughter and his wife, and he goes and buys the building next to the prison and goes and finds the person that killed his wife and his daughter, and he seeks vengeance, right? Yeah. If something like this has happened with Epstein or with, Clinton's, why hasn't anybody done something about it, whether it's a lawyer,
I think people have tried. I just think we don't hear about them. Take, for example, Mena, Arkansas. We talked about earlier, Southern Transport, Barry Seal, the cocaine, the Contra stuff that was going on. Yeah, there were some kids that ended up dead near there under suspicious circumstances, and the mother of one of those boys, I feel really bad, I can't remember her name, because she's suffered so much and worked so hard to try and find out what was going on there. Just decades trying to get to the bottom of it and trying to find out who killed her son.
What was the city in Arkansas?
This is Mena, Arkansas, so MENA we're talking about, but I think the exact location where they either lived or were found is a different city right next to it.
Crazy. Tying all this together, remember when we sat down with the drug trafficker for Pablo Escobar? What was his name? Roger Reeves? Mm-hmm. Didn't he talk about Barry Seal and Mena, Arkansas? Yeah. Wasn't that a theme with the Escobar and the drug running? Wasn't that a thing?
There was a lot of drug running.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yes. What the?
Well, it's not, well, here's basically what happened. I mean, this is sort of like a very simplified summary of major aspects of Iran-Contra, which is, of course, it's very complex. But basically, Bill Casey, a CIA director, was told by Congress, you can only send humanitarian aid to the Contras. He had set up this major military support apparatus for the Contras in Nicaragua. And he was like, well, how do I get around this? How do I get around Congress so I can finance whatever covert operation I want without Congress having to fund me? How do I undermine them, basically, so I can keep doing what I want, what I think is best, and screw what Congress thinks, or screw what the president thinks even, right?
No,
And how do you finance that? It gets complicated. It seems like some of the stuff they went towards was stuff like arms trafficking, drug trafficking. Maybe there's allegations of human trafficking, but who really knows, right?
I have a hard time, like, somebody not making this their life mission to be. A lot of times, you ask Rudy Giuliani, why'd you become a lawyer? Well, because who his dad was, what his dad did, what his family was linked to, how he was around the mob, how he could have been in the mob, and he chose to be a lawyer. One of my good friends became a cop in L.A. His brother was a criminal. And these are kids we went high school with. And he says, listen, he told his brother one day in front of everybody. He's the younger brother. He says, I'm going to become a cop, and I swear to God, if I find you in the streets, I'm going to put your ass in jail. And I love you. So he became a cop because his older brother was a criminal, and he was in and out of jail. He was sick of seeing what he was doing to his mother. So the younger brother took the pain of mom crying every single night because the older brother being a criminal. He said, I'm going to be a cop. Till today, he's 44 years old. He's a cop. So there has to be, if these stories are true and they're emotionally connected to the kid, or someone's going to be a lawyer, someone's going to say, I'm going to dedicate my life to this. Look at Hunter Moore. Hunter Moore is the revenge porn guy. I don't know if you follow this guy's story. His Netflix documentary came out.
The most hated man on the internet.
The most hated man on the internet. If you don't know this guy, he would get boyfriends that would send the nude photos of their girlfriends, exes, and he would put it on a website. He was making a bunch of money on this website. And eventually, a bunch of people are begging him to take their pictures down. I'm not taking your pictures down. Your ex gave it to you. Good for you. LOL, you can't do shit. Wait till you see I can get more pictures from your ex about you and all this stuff. He eventually gets caught, goes to jail, right? And Anderson Cooper's interviewing this guy 11 years ago. Do you feel guilty about it? Not really. Do you know what eventually happens? A mother, named Charlotte Laws found her daughter's nude picture under his website, asked him to take it down. He never took it down. She's the reason he went to jail. One mother dedicated her life to take this guy down, and she won. So if all of these stories are true about the Clintons, if all of these stories are true about the Epsteins, if all these stories are true and families are connected, suicides, people love those people. Kids love their dad, their mom.
Yeah,
Someone's got to
absolutely.
do something about it. How come
But-
nobody has?
Well, in the case of the person you're talking about, did the guy running that website have major intelligence connections? Did he have major connections to some of the wealthiest, most powerful people on Wall Street?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? So, it really depends on who you're going up against.
I don't know about that. I think if something like that happened, a kid would dedicate their lives to politics, office, being a billionaire, being an influential person.
But again, I think it depends on the kid. Take it like Ron Brown's son. Ron Brown's son went into politics and was just like his dad, sort of, because Ron Brown was pretty corrupt. He did end up getting killed because he agreed to cooperate, but only because, he was at the end. They had a lot of stuff on him, right?
Who's Ron Brown's son?
I think he's Ron Brown Jr. I can't remember, but he ended up being a corrupt politician. Even after what happened to his father. And I can't remember exactly. I think it was a much small, it wasn't national politics. It was either like city or state or something, but he ended up getting caught for some, I don't know if it was bribery, but something along that. The specifics I don't remember, but he just kind of went into the same business his dad was in. And maybe he was like, well, maybe something happened to my dad, but, I saw how my dad was before and he made a lot of money and I want to make a lot of money.
Let me ask you
like
this.
that.
Let me ask you a question. Let's just say you are, I'm gonna come to you. You are the daughter of any of these guys, okay, that were suicided, okay? Hypothetically,
Yeah,
they were suicided.
but I would fight, but I don't know if everyone's like me. You know what I mean? Some people are like,
But what would you do? Let's just say, I want to use you.
Sure.
What would you do? Say you're one of those people. It's not like you're going to go be a UFC fighter, find these guys in the streets and fight them.
No, sure.
How would you go about doing it? You're a 22-year-old daughter of one of these guys that the Clintons, Epsteins, they did something to him, or you're the sister of one of the
I would try and-
girls that Epstein picked up and he put on this island or the house. What would you do?
I would try and get people in media to tell my story, right? But what if the media won't touch the story that you're trying to get out there? Will they have you
Somebody
on?
would. A podcast
Maybe, but
would.
not a big podcast. And will
Why
bigger
wouldn't they,
podcasts
though?
pick it up? I don't know. I think it depends. Again, why did mainstream media not want to cover the fact that Epstein went to the White House with Clinton 17 times? Why did they not cover the fact that, last December, the picture finally came out of Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein shaking hands in 1993, but they claimed for, a couple years that they didn't meet until, after Clinton was out of office and wasn't president anymore? Why will they not look into the fact that Bill Gates says, we only met for the first time in 2011, but there's documentation that they knew each other at least a decade prior, if not longer? I think there are people who will try and fight, but sometimes, what if someone does try and go on a podcast and then they get a knock at the door and it's like, you can't talk to people anymore unless you want what happened to your father to happen to you or
So
something
you
like
would
that.
eventually be silenced as well?
Well, I don't know, but I think, you mean about my work
I'm
and
saying
stuff?
you. No.
Oh.
I'm saying you're the daughter. You're the sister of somebody.
I think some people, what if they try and do something and they get threatened?
Okay, so so it happens to you. Happens to you. Audience, if you're listening, happens to you. Comment in this. What do? Some happens to you, okay? Somebody did this to your mom, okay? Somebody did this to you. What would your long-term plan be? I'm asking a very serious question here.
I'm glad you used the word long term. Because I think short term, everyone's going to be filled with anger and vengeance.
You're not going to get to them
and you're
short term. This has to be a long-term plan.
Exactly, that's
and
my
it's got to be
point.
through career, law, politics, business. What would you
You're
do
going to have to
long-term?
dedicate your life to revenge, is what it comes to. You're like Batman at that point, right? Short term, everyone's going to be angry and upset and want to get vengeance.
Can't do nothing
But
with
Batman has the resources, right? He's Bruce Wayne. He's super rich. He's got all this technology. He's got this big company behind him. What if you're just a regular person? What kind of resources do you have? What if no one wants to have you on their podcast? What if you can't get anyone to tell your story?
Yeah, as emotional and as distraught and as revenge-stricken as you are, at some point, most people are just going to be like, fuck it, it's not worth it. And they give up.
But I mean, think about Esther Salas, who we talked about a little bit more. Her son's killed. Her husband's almost killed. How are you going to rule in that case
As a judge.
as a judge? What are you going to do? They've already taken the most important thing from you.
But what's the purpose of life at that point, though? What is the, at that point of the game, like,
I think what they're trying to say is don't fuck with the mob.
Yeah, I don't know about that. No, I think there are certain people that don't roll that way. I think there are certain people
I think there are certain people,
Yeah.
but is that everyone? I don't think it's everyone. I think there's some people, maybe like you, like me, like you, that would fight and do everything, but I don't know if that's everyone. You know what I mean? Some people, just want to be left alone.
But Pat, what was
after
the
a
movie
while.
that we all watched, The Man on Fire? That's kind of what this reminds me of. I don't remember the exact premise of that, but it was
But that's
revenge.
not. I'm actually not going that direction. I'm actually not going that direction to seek vengeance, to kill. But because in that situation, he didn't kill the brother. The
Denzel.
devil. He didn't kill the brother. He shot the brother's hand, and then he gave up his own life in exchange for Dakota Fanning, right? Because Greasy was Denzel, and he gave the exchange to find out if she's alive. Go ask him what she calls her teddy bear. Hey, what do you call the teddy bear? I call the teddy bear Greasy. She calls the teddy bear Greasy. Boom. That's the point of the story changes, right? Inflection point where you're like, oh my God, she's alive. Okay, what do you want? I want your life. But I don't know. Like, all I'm thinking about is if all this stuff is true and it doesn't become, by the way, not all of it needs to be true. If 20% of it is true, with all these personalities we hear about suicide and killing, I don't need 100% of it to be true. I need 10% to be true. I need 20% to be true. And they're not held accountable for it.
So if this is all about the Clintons, right? Let's keep in mind a lot of people that are on this, alleged suicided list are people that work with the Clintons and also were involved in allegedly a lot of shady stuff. So is there, an element of dirt to that as well? You see what I'm saying? Like, let's see, someone like Vince Foster, right? Allegedly Vince Foster's sister, there was like some money exchange and stuff before his death, and like maybe what if the family, the broader family, is sort of tied up in this stuff too? Do you think they're going to fight if someone gets killed that's close to them? If they're also sort of involved in this shady world?
That's not everybody, though.
No,
It's not
no,
everybody.
it's
Well,
not.
you're right about that.
I
but
agree
it's
that's not everybody, but you're talking about the Clintons. It's not like everyone that's on that suicided
Yeah.
list is like equally innocent as others, So it gets really complicated and convoluted. But again, I don't think, unfortunately, I didn't do a lot of research into their families and what they've done since then. I do know that like there's that mom from the kid that was killed near Mena, Arkansas, that's been fighting since the 80s.
Yeah.
Really. And there are some people like that, but is everyone on that list going to be like that? It's hard to know. And it's hard to know in this case too. I mean, you take someone like Jeffrey Epstein being suicided, there's his brother, but his brother seems to have been involved in a lot of this stuff. And maybe he just doesn't want to get axed by the same person that might have axed his brother,
What do you think it would take to get Ghislaine to speak and actually speak? What do you think it would take?
I don't think it'll happen.
But what do you all the money in the world wouldn't do it?
No, I don't think it would have to be money. I think there would have to be mass disclosure of what was actually going on, and then maybe she'd talk about it, but she won't be the first to talk about it. No way.
So
she's in a very vulnerable situation. She got moved sort of like to a country club prison, probably because she agreed to not talk, right?
Yeah. So you think she's done?
All right, guys. Wrapping up the show tonight. Thought that was a pretty crazy podcast, pretty crazy interview, and looking forward to reading some of the information in the book. So, thanks, guys, for hanging out. Sorry I was out of the chat there for a little bit, but good to see you, Normock, and what's up, JP and Rondon. I hope you have a great rest of y'all's week, and okay. Oh, I was supposed to start an hour earlier. All right. Well, I'll know for next time. So, you guys enjoy the rest of your week. And we'll catch you guys next time. Peace, guys.